mark the 6th anniversary of the fall of the city to U.S. troops. The rally was called by Shiite cleric Muqtada al-Sadr. The crowd burned an effigy of George W. Bush as it hung from a pillar where Saddam Hussein's statue once stood in Firdos Square. Speakers urged President Obama to withdraw all U.S. troops from Iraq immediately. Obama, who flew into Baghdad on an unannounced visit on Tuesday, has ordered U.S. combat troops to depart Iraq by the end of August 2010, leaving a residual force of up to 50,000 trainers, advisors, and logistics personnel. On Tuesday, Obama addressed troops at Camp Victory, a U.S. base near the Baghdad airport.
This is going to be a critical period, these next 18 months. I was just discussing this with your commander, but I think it's something that all of you know. It is time for us to transition to the Iraqis. They need to take responsibility for their country and for their sovereignty.
Obama did not travel beyond the U.S. military base. Time magazine wrote, quote, "In style, substance, and photo ops, Obama's unannounced stopover in Baghdad was straight out of the Bush playbook." His visit came as nearly 40 people were killed in a series of bombings around Baghdad. The Guardian newspaper of London wrote, quote, "The wave of attacks, the largest number of bombs in one day in almost 2 years." For more, we are joined by independent journalist Nir Rosen, who's just back from Iraq. He has covered the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan since 2003. He's a fellow at the NYU Center on Law and Security, as well as the New America Foundation. He joins us here in our Firehouse studio in New York. Welcome to Democracy Now!, Nir. Well, tell us, you spent quite a bit of time over the last 6 years in Iraq, the changes that you have seen, that you've been writing about recently.
Well, certainly in terms of people's personal safety in Baghdad, life is better. There are conspicuous displays of wealth that you wouldn't have seen before, such as people driving expensive cars, those few who have money, because they're not worried as much about kidnapping for ransom. You see girls going to university dressed in less conservative clothes, clearly a sign they're not worried about extremist attacks. Liquor shops open, again a sign that at least religious militias are less active. So people aren't worried about the random chaotic violence as much as we used to see before a couple of years ago, when you could be killed for any reason on the street, and every day there would be 100, 200 corpses on the street. But Baghdad remains a heavily, heavily militarized city. Every block there are police checkpoints, army checkpoints. The Iraqi army and the Iraqi security forces, for them, torture is routine and systematic. If you're going to be arrested, you're going to be tortured. Regardless of whether you're guilty or innocent, if you pay money, you will be released. I have friends who are, I have a former Iraqi police captain that was a friend of mine who targeted Shia militias, and he was framed for a crime and arrested, and he demanded $20,000 for his release. He paid $7,000 and got out. But I think despite the fact that certainly the random criminal violence and militia violence has subsided somewhat, although we do ignore how bad the violence is still, the clearest sign that life is not good yet, that security is not good yet, is the fact that the majority of the millions of displaced Iraqi refugees and internally displaced Iraqis have not yet returned to their homes and do not plan on returning to their homes.
And there's supposed to be a new report coming out on the displacement in Iraq. Could you talk about that?
Well, today, Refugees International, the advocacy group in Washington, is going to release a report about the current status of displaced Iraqis, both inside and outside Iraq. They've been researching the subject for the last few years, and I've been consulting on that subject for them. I visited numerous neighborhoods in Baghdad and elsewhere in Fallujah, Karbala, Hilla. And you have these vast wastelands, basically huge piles of sewage and garbage, where tens of thousands of Iraqis live in shacks and hovels, squatting in bomb shelters. They receive no help from the government, from the UN, from the US. They're unknown. They worry that if they call attention to themselves, that they'll be forced to leave. The government, of course, doesn't want to help them in a way, because they feel if they provide them assistance, they might get comfortable where they are. And the Iraqi government is trying to encourage, if not force, the displaced Iraqis to go back to their homes so they can say their refugee file is closed, life in Baghdad is okay. I saw in southern Baghdad, on basically a vast pile of of mud and sewage. A man had built a home entirely out of air conditioners. He'd piled air conditioners 3 high and built walls and thrown a tarp over it, and that was his home. It's almost impossible to breathe when you visit many of these people because the stench of the sewage and garbage is so strong. They have little access to health care, to schools. Their life is really miserable and desperate. And what's remarkable is that they have not become more politicized, and the militias have not yet taken advantage of these poor, desperate people who've been ignored by everybody.
Nir, it's good to join you here from Raleigh, North Carolina, but I wanted to ask you about the metrics that are used to determine progress in Iraq, and also if you can talk about the state of the Iraqi police and military.
It depends whose point of view you're going by. Certainly from an American point of view, one of the key metrics was the deaths of American soldiers, and that has dramatically been reduced, in part because even during the Civil War, the Americans were no longer the primary enemy. Iraqis were fighting each other. Now, of course, even Iraqi-on-Iraqi violence is significantly reduced. The Mahdi army had a freeze, a ceasefire, and since then they've been continuously suppressed, at least the more rogue elements, by both the Americans and the Iraqi government. Sunni militias were really crushed, Sunni populations mostly displaced, and those remaining Sunni militias, many of them decided to switch sides, get on the American payroll to survive. So in terms of violence, it is down compared to 2005, 2006, but not compared to 2003, 2002. It's important to remember that we didn't create a paradise in Iraq. We created a hell, and now maybe it's gone down from the 7th rung of hell to the 2nd rung of hell. It's still pretty bad for most Iraqis in terms of water, electricity. There are still explosions. There are now, Prime Minister Maliki is creating kind of his own Republican Guard, an extra-legal group of elite, thousands of soldiers. They act with impunity, above the law. And American soldiers, of course, continue to go on operations as well. And innocent Iraqis do get killed on these raids, and every death is too much.
And President Obama's comment as he flew in unexpectedly, at least for most people, didn't realize he'd be making this surprise trip after Turkey, saying to the troops, you've given Iraq the opportunity to stand on its own as a democratic country. Did President Bush's surge work in Iraq?
Well, it's complicated. The short answer is no, and that little political progress was made. Violence is down. It's contentious whether that reduction in violence is mostly due to a shift in the American posture and the way they acted, protecting the security of the population more, focusing on neighborhoods. That was definitely a factor, but I think the primary factor was internal Iraqi dynamics. The Iraqi security forces, dominated by Shia militias, acting as Shia militias became very strong, the Sunnis were defeated. The expulsion of Sunnis from Baghdad and its environs was nearly complete. So these Sunni militias basically had no sea in which to swim in, if you will, and they ended up kind of suing for peace. I think it's one of the most important factors. The defeat of the Sunnis, the creation of the awakening groups, which of course the Americans took advantage of astutely, and the Mahdi army ceasefire. Shia militias realized that they had extended themselves too far. They were going to get smacked down by the American military as well, but they had achieved their goals. They had soundly defeated the Sunnis. Iraq is now a Shia state. You feel that in police stations and ministries where there are Shia religious posters. You see that even on the concrete walls that protect the Baghdad Council. There's a huge mural of Shia pilgrims going down to Karbala on the pilgrimage. This is not an aggressive sectarianism, but it's a clear sign this is a confident Shia state, and Sunnis have now kind of been forced to accept their position as a minority, which it took this brutal violence to sort of force them to recognize.
Nir, I'd like to ask you, you've also spent time in Afghanistan, the other major conflict area for the United States in the region. Your sense of how the U.S. involvement is going there and what obviously President Obama is expanding it, and what the prospects are for the U.S. occupation there?
It's certainly a very long-term approach they're taking. 10, 15 years down the line. And the most successful, so the best case scenario for them is Afghanistan will end up looking somewhat like Chad after billions of dollars being spent, thousands of lives being lost, and very little progress to show, I think. Certainly, there is a different approach. They've, under the Obama administration, and they've brought some of the wiser people in the military and civilian side of the administration to focus on this. I'm skeptical that it can succeed. I'm even skeptical that there's a reason why the U.S. should be in Afghanistan. I don't think that al-Qaeda is a very significant threat. I think there are more important things to worry about. And certainly I think a better way to protect the U.S. from al-Qaeda is not by occupying Afghanistan and bombing Pakistan, which only creates more enemies, but perhaps continuing to focus on